So for people who don't know me, as I said, my name is Clodagh O'Donovan. I am a Corkonian. I'm living in Middleton with my husband and 2 kids. And I've been here for about, nearly 3.5 years now. I grew up in an area of Cork called Farmers Cross. And for people who may not be familiar with Farmers Cross, it's close to the airport and therefore very close to the Cork Airport Business Park. And when I finished college, it kind of made sense to start my search for my first full-time job in the Airport Business Park. Little did I realise I would go on to spend about, the next 16 years, give or take a few months, actually working in the ground of the Airport Business Park. So it's been a big part of my career. Going back to that first time when I just decided, okay, I need to, get myself into the working world and all of that. So I went around with a few CVs around the business park and dropped in on spec, as you did back then, and received a call for an interview at one of the companies. And the following week, it all went very fast, I started working. And shortly after joining, I had a chance to transfer to the HR team. And to be honest, I didn't really know much about HR. And I slowly got to learn about what it was all about, and I was kind of doing very, the basic HR admin tasks that you do when you're first starting out. And I quickly became to realise that I really enjoyed it. I just loved kind of interacting with people, and I suppose that was really the key thing. And it was an area I didn't know a huge amount about, and my manager at the time encouraged me, why don't you go and do like the certificate in personnel practice? So she knew me well, because she knew I didn't want to be committing to like 3 or 4 years without knowing that it was something I wanted to continue with. So that was, the academic 9 months, and it was perfect. And it gave me a real taste for what it was all about. And so much so that I went on then to study my HR or my degree in HR management. And during that time then, I was building my HR career, I suppose, in that first company. So I'm not going to bore you with the details of all the different roles I've had. They spanned financial services, information technology, medical devices. And I suppose if we kind of fast forward to 2019, I was after finishing a temporary contract, and I'd taken some personal time. And during this time, little thought that had been in the back of my mind for some time about setting up on my own came a little bit louder. And I decided, sure, look, why not? And if I had been maybe 2 months later, I probably would have been asking myself, why would I? Because little did I know, but 2 months after I set up, the whole world went into a series of lockdowns, and things changed beyond recognition, and everybody's lives were turned upside down. Everything went remote, everything went online. And, but like we just got on with it. And I suppose the thing about what I really love about what I do is I love meeting people. I love hearing their stories. I love meeting business people who have some problems that they need to solve and being able to offer them that solution. So when I say people and listening, it's just that's what really drew me to HR in the first place. When I first got a taste of it, shall we say, and why I wanted to continue and develop my career in it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about AdvanceHR. So as I said, I set up AdvanceHR last year. And what I do is I offer practical HR solutions that allow businesses more time to grow their business, to develop their people, and serve their customers. My typical clients would be micro and small businesses, and there's a real burden on these type of businesses from HR compliance and just general HR activities point of view. And kind of recognizing that when I first set up AdvanceHR, that was my main reason for wanting to partner with this particular market. And so I support the micro and small businesses to free up their time, basically, because they can end up spending huge amounts of their time on HR related activities, whether it's an employee relations type of thing, whether it's just figuring out like employment documents and stuff like that. And very often there's no need for them to have full-time HR. So that's kind of where I come into play, and I help them out with that. So the way I kind of think of it, I suppose, is it's them outsourcing issues and receiving solutions. So I'm 12 months in since setting up, and it's been an interesting 12 months, as I'm sure everybody here can imagine, and I'm sure you've all got your own experiences over the last 12 months. But what I love about it is I'm able to still meet people. It might be virtually, but I'm still meeting people. I'm still connecting with people. I'm still getting opportunities to partner with new business owners, and it's you know, that's what else can I ask for, really, you know. So when I was thinking about the Lunch and Learn speaker series with Republic of Work, I was saying to myself, what would be a good you know, what would make a good webinar? What would people be interested in? What could I share that would be able to make people managing others and make their lives a little bit easier? And that's how I came to the topics that I'm going to cover today. But before we kind of get into some of the information there, I'm curious to see, when it comes to managing people, what's the one thing that would kind of make you run for the hills? If you want to unmute here, and we'll have a quick chat.
Confrontation, difficult discussions with employees.
Yeah. And what is it about that, Linda?
Oh, just, I suppose, just avoiding the conflict or the potential fallout from it. It's just, I'd rather run away.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very daunting to have conversation with somebody, and, you know, it's not going to, you know, your message isn't going to be received very well. And the you know, the knee-jerk reaction there is to maybe not so much ignore it, but avoid it. What about other people? Would you kind of identify with that, or are there other things that would bring you out in a cold sweat when you think about managing people?
Yeah, I'm similar to Linda. Just don't want to avoid the confrontation, don't want to make anybody feel bad, even though I know the feedback is constructive. Mm-hmm. But I suppose then it's just about how to go about giving that feedback so that it is constructive and it doesn't just come across as criticism.
Yeah.
Or that they're doing a bad job, or, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I try not to demotivate people when you're having that conversation.
Yeah.
And trying to, you know, to keep them going and to keep them on track. It's a very difficult conversation to have. There's just no denying it. But there are some kind of tips and some frameworks actually that you can use that makes it a lot easier for you to be able to have that conversation, you know, and we'll have a look at that in a while. I'm just wondering if people can turn on their cameras. It would be great, just so that we can have a bit more of an interactive session, I suppose, really. Because you know, it's nice to put a face to the name as well. So anybody else want to say anything before we move on? So one of the topics I mentioned in the introduction to the webinar that was circulated is all about, you know, what kind of questions to ask when a position comes up. Because when I think about managing people from kind of 0 to 6 months, what I think of first of all is the very first day when you notice that you actually need to hire somebody in. And often there can be
oh, great, thanks.
Be of a, you know, a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction with regards to, oh, somebody's resigned, so therefore I need to fill this position, and it's like go, 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 right? It's a good idea just to take a step back and ask yourself the question, do I actually need to replace this position? Is that role still adding, sorry, I should have moved on there. Is that role still adding, is still contributing to overall success of my business? And like, what is the purpose of it? A lot of the time we don't have the chance to do that, especially when somebody's in it. Because if you come up with a different answer when somebody's in the role, well, that's a whole different type of scenario. Let's not talk about that now. But it is, you know, it just gives you that opportunity to check in and see if you actually do need this role. And if you do, well, what is the value that it's bringing? And asking these questions, it'll help you when you're looking at the job description, if there's a need for you to continue to replace. And if you don't need to replace, and that's the answer you arrive at, then happy days, you're saving yourself time and money. So one of the other things to ask yourself is, has the role changed since I filled it last? So, you know, especially in the current situation that we're in, things have changed so much in the last 12 months. And you may not have replaced somebody in this role for about 2 or 3 years. So just kind of taking another step back and saying to yourself, okay, well, is what I need from that role, is that still what I need, or has that shifted a little bit? And if that's the case, then what does that look like? And all of these questions will help you when you're coming to creating your job description, because you'll have it clear in your head what it is you need from that role. And it wasn't just that knee-jerk reaction, somebody's resigned, I need to get a bum on a seat kind of thing, you know? And the final thing to ask is, what skills and experiences do I have in my current structure, in my current team, my current organization? And the reason for asking that question is, perhaps there's a promotion or a development opportunity that you have the talent that you need within the team, and you can move people around. So just some of the things to kind of consider to fill or not to fill. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So once you've kind of figured out, yeah, I need to fill the role. Yeah, I have a really good idea of what it is the role does for the team and how it contributes to the overall success of my business. I don't have anybody within the team that's going to fill that. So I'm going to create a job description. So a job description is basically, it's the look and the feel of the role. So it's telling people who don't know anything about the job and may not know anything about your company, what it would look like, what it would feel like to work and do that particular job. So you're setting out the skills and the experiences and qualifications. And these are things that you're going to, this information you're going to have gathered from the, from the previous review of the role. And as well as that, it's going to be based on your observations of what worked really well with the person that was in the role and what you need going forward. When we talk about qualifications, sometimes you can see that, there's a certain level of qualification required for a role. And I would always encourage hiring managers to think about this a bit more carefully and ask yourself the question, is there a real genuine need for somebody to have X, Y, Z qualification in order for them to do this job? Because you could be ruling out very strong candidates who have experience in spades, but may not necessarily have the third level qualifications that are on the job spec. And when you are looking at people then and you see the applications coming in and you're looking at your job description, you're assessing to see, okay, well, this person has very close match and this person, yeah, they have a gap here and I actually need this particular skill. And some people kind of think they need to have almost all of those boxes checked in order to progress with somebody and bring them in and meet them. And what I would usually say is 70 to 90% match is probably more preferred. It gives whoever is coming into that position, it gives them an opportunity to grow and develop within the role. Because after you go into the effort of spending time and money, recruiting somebody, bringing them in, training them, getting them up to speed with everything, the last thing you want is 6 to 12 months down the line for them to become bored and looking for their next challenge outside of your company, So that's what I mean when I say the 70 to 90% match, leave a bit of room for development, I suppose. And while you're going through this process of creating your job description, you're building up in your own mind what your preferred candidate is going to look like, and what you need them to look like, what you need them to have, the kind of value that you want them to bring to your team, the kind of, I suppose, the kind of person that will add to the culture in your organization. And when you're going through that kind of shortlisting and that interview process, that'll be very much the front of your mind. And you can refer back to that when you're making your decisions on whether to progress somebody or to leave their application where it is. So before we move on to the next kind of topic, I was just wanting to check in with people and see, when you have a position, or if you had a position in the morning, what are the kind of questions you would ask yourself? Would it make sense to kind of check in and see, okay, just because that role has always been there, that it kind of needs to still be there? Is there a mad rush to kind of, make sure there's a bit of a handover or something? When we're going into shortlisting processes, or when we're going into interviewing processes, there is, well, I could do a whole other webinar on interviewing, but there is just one aspect I wanted to kind of go into a little bit and discuss with you today, and that's about unconscious bias. So I suppose first, are you familiar with unconscious bias? Do you know what it means? Not looking for the definition or anything, but like just from the point of view of what it would look like. Do people know? Does anyone want to take that?
It's making assumptions, kind of, I suppose, based on your own experience and your own perspective, but judging people on that without necessarily having the proof.
Yeah, and do you know what? Like, everyone's human, like, and it's kind of in our human nature that we tend to be drawn to people who are like us, and we almost seek out similarities so that we, when we're connecting with people, and it's just part of who we are. And you're not to be giving yourselves a hard time over it. It's just be kind of aware that it can influence decision making, and especially when it comes to hiring new people in. So, like, as Gillian, you were saying there about like assumptions, it is exactly that. And it could be just, looking at somebody and seeing where they went and where they got their third level qualification. And without even realizing it, you've made an assumption, either in a positive way or a negative way. And that's kind of where the halo and horns effect comes in when we're talking about unconscious bias. So like the halo effect is that you have a positive association with something you hear or something you see about a candidate, and you're looking at their application process and something jumps out at you. And immediately anything else that's going on in the background isn't there at the front of your mind. You're focusing in on this, and this is making you kind of lean towards bringing this person in. And if you were to take a step back and kind of challenge yourself and say, well, okay, aside from this, what else is making them a good fit against the job description, against what I'm looking for, against the culture of the organization? And you might be surprised then about what might come out of that. And then the kind of horns effect is the opposite, and it's, you see or learn something about somebody and you have a negative association with it. And so maybe it's a company that they worked in before, or perhaps it's where they're from. It could be their name, it could be anything. And it's the same kind of idea that it's almost like you're reluctant to consider them based on this kind of assumption or judgment that comes to your mind when you see this. It's like a trigger almost. And the best thing about triggers is just to be aware of them, that they exist. And I'm not saying that you would immediately, flatten that down, because, gut instincts, gut feelings, they are an important part when we're thinking about things and when we're reflecting on big decisions. However, they need to be, I suppose, supported by facts. So one of the ways that you can do this when it comes to unconscious bias is just kind of taking a step back and looking back on that job description, and then just doing a matching exercise and see, okay, so putting this to one side now for a minute, what I think is great or what I think is really bad. what else is there that will either like support my decision to bring this person forward or support my decision to leave them where they are. And just by asking those kinds of questions, immediately you're becoming more aware of that unconscious bias, and it can creep in. Like, you know, it's just very, as I said, like it's just human nature. But the secret to managing it is really by looking at the job description and just referring back to that, and referring back to that kind of candidate profile that you created in your mind as well as to what you feel is needed. Does that make sense? Do you think like that would be, like, do you think that unconscious bias, does that exist where you work? Maybe people might not be.
Emer's just popped into the chat box there. She said, I think before she mentioned that there are automatic patterns of thinking, and she just said, yes, there is all.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not just when it comes to, you know, hiring decisions, you know, also when it comes to promoting people, when it comes to looking for people for projects, you know, it's something that's there. I suppose I'm talking about it in the context of bringing people into the company, because that's what we're talking about today. It's those kind of 0 to 6 months and managing people. But it, you know, it is just something to be aware of, and awareness is the best way of kind of preventing you from being overly influenced by that when making your decisions. So you have gone through your interview process, you've identified your preferred person, you've made your offer. I'm skipping a few steps ahead because, as I said, there's a lot what you're talking about is just the interviewing itself and that whole process. And what I really want to kind of get to is from when the person comes in. So now you're ready. Well, hopefully you're ready. And the person is hoping to join. But there can be a bit of a time lag from when you last met with them and when you made that offer to when they start, because people have notice periods, and it could be anything between 4 to kind of 8 weeks. So one of the ways that you can kind of bridge that gap and remove that kind of silence is by getting in touch with them before they start. And I'm not talking like you can pick up the phone and have a call if you want, but even a simple email, because everyone is really busy, and just an email to touch base and say, hey, how's it going? Really can't wait for you to join our team, and looking forward to seeing you on such and such a date, and let them know what time they should arrive, who'll be there to meet them, and kind of set the scene for what their first day will look like. This will help them build a picture of what they're going to be doing, and it's also a great opportunity as well. Remind them if they need to bring any kind of documents with them on their first day. But it is a good way of connecting with people before they come in and just letting them know that they're not a distant memory just because you haven't spoken to them for 4 weeks, and it's very much on your mind that they are coming and that you're preparing for their arrival as such. One of the things I would always kind of recommend when it comes to bringing new people in to a company is having a think about what kind of supports are there to help them transition into their new role. And this might be from a training point of view. It could be from the point of systems support. Another option as well is, if somebody is joining your organization and they're going to be working remotely, and kind of thinking about what that'll look like and what that'll feel like for them will help you as well. I was talking to somebody there recently, and they changed jobs during the first lockdown, so back in June last year. And I was just asking them, what did you find the most challenging when you were changing roles in the middle of, and going, working remotely and not meeting people, that you were going to be working with. And they said that the hardest part for them was not being able to turn around in their chair to somebody and ask them a simple question, or to turn around and run something by someone. That because they were working remotely and everybody was working remotely, it automatically made it more formal to have to pick up the phone and call somebody to ask them a simple question, or even sending an instant message still seemed so much more formal than you swiveling around in your chair and saying, do you mind if I run something by you? And that was what they found very difficult. when they first changed jobs. And one of the ways around it would be to have a buddy. So you could have somebody either on the team or someone within the company, and they could be the person that the new hire goes to if they have a question, or if they need a bit of help, or if they just want to run something by someone. Because you're not always going to be immediately available, right? You're going to be tied up with your own kind of priorities, and you don't want that person to feel lost or feel like that they can't be, they can't be bothering people. Like, one of the things this person I spoke to said that they didn't want to be picking up the phone, and they didn't want to be sending emails at the very beginning because they didn't want to be bothering people, and they didn't want to be given the impression that they didn't know what they were doing. And when you think about it, it's something we probably took for granted when we were, prior to the pandemic. If you were starting a new job, you'd have people around you that you can bounce stuff off of. And just being kind of aware, I suppose, of what it will look like for the new person coming in, whether that's remote or in the office. And the other thing I would say about preparing for someone's arrival, and you might be able to identify with this, but just getting things in place like the system access and the email and their accounts that they need set up. And even like if they're going to be in an office, getting a desk sorted for them, even if it is a hot desk, at least have a space for them when they arrive. And these kind of things, they just set the right tone, and it's a really good foundation then for your working relationship as time goes on. Just because you're telling people, well, we knew you were coming, we're prepared for you, we're setting you up so you can hit the ground running from day one by having all of these things in place. And for you then as well, it's taking away that last minute panic of trying to find somebody who can set up new accounts, or finding somebody, who can approve some space for the person. That's what it's all about. It's about setting up for success, both for you and for the other person, How do things like that work where in the companies that you're in, or even in your own companies? Is that kind of last minute scramble, or is there a process? Would you have a little checklist?
There would be an induction process.
Right, okay.
And like we have a 6-month onboarding process that it is tick the box, but you have to touch base with them every week.
Okay, every week for the 6 months?
Yeah, but they work on the floor in the same premises as you, so you have your 10-minute catch up every week to make sure that you're achieving the tasks that are aligned. That's
brilliant. That's really good. And when you say it's tick the box, is it worthwhile? Like, do people find it beneficial? Managers now I'm asking about.
Yes, because like at the end of the 6 months, you're confident and competent that their skills are updated and they're ready to work away themselves.
Yeah.
It would be entry level stuff, sales assistants in the store type of thing. So
yeah. That's great though. That's really good, because it's great to have that kind of structure in place from day one. It's just fantastic for setting the people up for success and being able to keep an eye on their performance as well through those regular 10-minute catch-ups every week. Like, that's fantastic. There's never going to be any surprises for that for people if there's a mistake or something like that. It's all going to be caught, and addressed on a timely basis, which is just really good. And it's a very kind of important part of it, really, is that kind of sharing of feedback on a regular basis. That's great. Does anybody else have similar, or do they do something completely different? Will we move on? We move on.
There's a comment from Emer there actually in the chat box. So it says, my position is different from the normal as I am a facilitator in a co-work space. So while I am in charge of the space, I am not in charge of the members as such.
Okay. So it's more responsible for what's happening around as opposed to the people that are in there and doing stuff. Would that be kind of a fair description?
And she agreed there, and she said HR is difficult.
Okay. And it can be, there's no doubt about it. And it really depends on what's in place in a business. because if there's nothing, if there's no structure, if there's no frameworks, it's very difficult to manage, you know, both people and, you know, situations and all that kind of stuff. During the first 3 months, there is kind of when people are really kind of settling in and they're getting a feel for what it is the job is all about, you're getting a feel for them. And this is your kind of opportunity to lay good foundations for open and transparency, so that when you're communicating, when you're sharing information, when you're giving them feedback, that you have that kind of open relationship with them. And it makes it a lot easier for them to hear things, especially if it's not what they want to hear. So during those kind of first 3 months, there's a kind of few legal bits and pieces that need to be addressed. So things like making sure that they have their written statement of their terms and conditions. So that needs to be given to a new employee within the first 2 months of them starting. And I would always recommend for people who you are bringing into the organisation, I know not everybody has contracts, and that's, you know, that's just reality. But the reason I would always recommend that you have some form of written statement of terms and conditions is because that's where you can put in your probation clause. And your probation clause is just the best tool that you can have during the first 6 months of managing somebody. If it's not there, it's very difficult. You know, it's very difficult to kind of stand over decisions that might need to be made if things aren't working out the way you want them to. So the kind of statement of terms, or the contract, shall we say, and the job description. So you already have that. So you just give them a copy of that when they start. But you're not just going to give the job description and say, off you go. You're going to check in with them. So Ciara mentioned this is a great setup where she is. And, you know, those kind of casual conversations every week for 10 minutes. It's a brilliant way of actually managing people coming in. With, I suppose, on a more kind of, you know, depending on the role, I suppose, depending on the role and the size of the business, it mightn't be possible for you to meet on a weekly basis. But I suppose I would always have a kind of, I have a framework that I would recommend people kind of look at from managing the probation. And outside of the informal chats and conversations that you're inevitably going to have, it's having kind of more formal check-ins. So the first would be kind of on day 1 or week 1. And that's kind of where you're meeting and you're greeting and you're making sure they're settling in okay, that they have everything they need. And then kind of month 1, that's where you kind of sit down and you have a chat with them about what it is you expect from them when they're in this role. And so it's not so much looking just at the job description, but also looking at kind of the behaviours you need to see from them, or competencies is another word, and how they can go about achieving the kind of expectations that you're setting out, and telling them as well at this point, this is how their performance is going to be measured. So setting very clear and detailed goals. They don't have to be complicated. In fact, they probably shouldn't be complicated at this stage, but it's a good opportunity for you to set out very clearly to that person, this is what's expected of you, and this is how we're going to be measuring whether or not you're kind of meeting what we're looking for in this role. And by giving them that information, that knowledge is power, that means they have, you know, they can take the ownership for their own responsibility. You know, it's up to them to make sure that they're delivering these on these expectations. And of course, you're going to support them and give them whatever they need in order to get there. But you want them to take responsibility and ownership from day 1. And so again, like, you know, by laying this kind of foundation of trust, of open transparency, it just makes it that bit easier to have the conversations about performance further on. So you'll be talking about both the achievements and the misses, as I have down there, trying to be a little bit more rather than saying the successes and the failures. But the first 3 months, it's going to be this time frame where you get a real feel for whether the person is working out or not, whether they're able for the job, whether they're doing it the way you want them to do it. So they could be brilliant performers, but they could be brilliant at their role, but they may alienate everybody around them. If that's not good to you. You're just going to end up with a very disgruntled team if that's the case. So it's checking in during those first 3 months at kind of first day, first week point, again, first month, and again at the third month. One of the things I always kind of suggest, because I've seen it work well in, down through the years, just to have a bit of follow-up after that little chat. So, 4 or 5 sentences basically saying, great that you're settling in well. We discussed A, B, and C, doing great in these areas. X, Y, and Z needs a little bit of focus, and we wanted to improve here. This is what you have, in order to help you support, in order to support you, in these areas. This is what we can do for you, and we're going to check back again in a month's time and see how things are going. So just by having that in an email, it's kind of what you need if you have to say, if you have to show somebody how you gave that person, made them aware, I suppose, really, of what was going wrong and how they needed to improve. And then you go on to the next 3 months, and it's decision time, because it's at this stage really you're coming towards the end of that probation period, and you need to decide whether or not you're going to be passing their probation, and following up on the conversations that you've had with, say, month 1 and month 3. You'll be looking at the delivery of the performance and things like that, and seeing how well they're fitting into the team, and just making an assessment really of whether you feel that they're the right fit for the role. And they'll be doing exactly the same thing. So that probation kind of works both ways. It works for the manager and the company, and it works for the person themselves, because I suppose they want validation that they've made the right decision in taking a job in this company. What happens if, I suppose that's really where it kind of gets to the point where things aren't going well. So it's all fine and well talking about when things are going great and everybody's on target and they're meeting their goals and they're getting on well with everybody on the team. That's what success looks like. But what if that's not what you're seeing? So at this point, what do people usually do when it gets to the point where you're kind of month 4 into a 6-month probation period and things aren't working out? How do people manage that usually? Ciara. Oh, sorry, Linda, go on.
Sorry, I got kicked off earlier on, so I couldn't answer you. So like we would do a 1 month review, a 3-month review, and a 6-month review. So you sit with the staff member and you have standard questions and have the chat. And it's from both sides, as you say. But going back to what do you do if it's not working out? I suppose I've had the opposite issue where I had the perfect employee for 6 months and then they're made full-time and then I get the employee from hell.
Yeah.
So, and then you can't do anything. Well, I feel you can't do anything.
Yeah. And were there any warning signs?
Absolutely none.
Nothing.
It's like Dr. Jekyll and Miss Hyde.
Oh.
You have the perfect employee.
Yeah.
No signs, because I was asked that. I was asked that, how could you get it so wrong? And I was like, there were absolutely no signs, because the person wouldn't have been. Yeah, I don't want to give away too much information either.
I know. And it can be very frustrating when that happens, and it does happen. It does happen. Sometimes there can be a couple of signs along the way, but it's not. They're not so glaring that it's only when you're looking back you're kind of going, yeah, maybe there was a couple of things there. But sometimes then you can have what Linda's just described, and you can have somebody that just switches. Something may have happened in their personal life. Something might be going on in the background. Who knows? But I suppose the impact is what, the impact is what you see. And it is a difficult kind of situation to manage. And we can have a little chat about that towards the end if we have some time, about, after the 6 months. And what about, Ciara, I'm curious just because you have what sounds like a really good kind of structure there. What would happen with, say, coming up to the end of probation?
Well, you would have your longer meetings then at the three months, and then kind of like 2 weeks before the 6 months is up. You'd kind of enforce a casual long conversation just to ensure everything is like what you see. But because I was working with like 10 or 12 different employees on the floor, I'd be asking around with the employees, well, how are you getting on with X, and so on and so forth. And then sometimes it's not, the gap isn't always there because the new employee, maybe it's something that they're frustrated with because we haven't provided the skills for them to be able to do their job, and asking open questions with them can identify that. But if I have any bit of a niggle, and I know Linda said there wasn't any niggle there, if I had any bit of a niggle, automatically I would extend the probation.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'd recommend. If there is
not, we would.
If there's any doubt at all, you're better off to extend. If we'll say you've been having conversations at month 3 and you're into month 4 and things haven't improved, that's 4 weeks. There are very little roles out there that you can't show an improvement within 4 weeks. You know, like a lot of the time, it's simple changes that need to be made for there to be an improvement. So that is ample amount of time. And if you're still having those kind of same conversations at 4 months, it's a good time to start saying to somebody, if we don't see the improvement we need to see, we're not going to be in a position to continue your contract.
Not it's a behavioural issue that comes up, and that's in their control. And if they're not going to change that behaviour, you can't train it out of them.
No, you absolutely can't. No. And I suppose as long as you're making the person aware that there's a problem here and you're explaining to them what the impact is and you're talking to them to figure out the solution for it, there is not much else. And you tell them what will happen if things don't improve. There's very little that you as a manager can do after that. It's up to that person at that point in time. And you have done a lot of kind of, you have I hate using the word evidence, but in a workplace relations commission, that's exactly what they look for. Yeah. So you have that evidence to support you followed your process. This is the process. You followed it. You made them aware that there was a problem. You told them how it could be fixed. You gave them the opportunity to fix it. And you advised them if they didn't fix it, this is what's going to happen. There's nothing more that you can do. And at times it really does get to the point where it's not going to work out and you do have to make those tough calls. Sometimes you could be making them 4 or 5 months. You might even wait until the person gets to the 6-month point, and that's okay. It's perfectly fine as long as you follow those steps. And as long as you can say to somebody, well, yes, I did tell them there was a problem and I went through those steps. As long as you can show that that's what you've done, then there is no issue. If you decide, oh, this person isn't working out, they're on probation, I'm just going to dismiss them and let them go, you could be at risk there, because now a lot of the legislation for dismissal, a person needs to have 12-month service before they can take a claim. But there are legislations where that length of service isn't required and they could still take a claim, even though they're in their probationary period. So just because we'll say it could be there in the contract that you can, you only have to give weeks notice during probation, you still need to have some kind of a process, not a lengthy disciplinary process. That's not what we're talking about here, but just some kind of a process where you can say, yeah, they were made aware, they had everything they needed and it just didn't work out, basically, And it's important that you make those difficult calls, because if you don't, you'll end up with somebody who's passed their probation, thinks that what they're doing is the right thing to do. So as far as they're concerned, they're doing everything right. They passed their probation. And that's when things can get really difficult, because then you're into a case where someone is permanent, and then you are going down a disciplinary route if that's what's needed. And if there's no improvement and that's where it goes, and that's a lot more of a difficult, time-consuming and drawn out. Well, not drawn out. That's the wrong word to use, but it's a very stressful time for everybody when you get into that kind of when you get into that situation, So when it goes wrong, I kind of went on ahead a little bit, but the most important thing, as I said, is make that difficult call, take action, and follow it through. So if you say to somebody kind of month 4, look, if things don't improve, we're going to be meeting again next week. If things haven't improved by the end of next month, then we're not going to be in a position to continue your contract. When it gets to that point and gets to that end date, make sure to follow through on that. And, you know, when it gets to that stage, you're looking at whether you're going to end or extend. And I would only ever say to extend if you feel that the person has the ability to turn things around. Or if you get to the point where you haven't necessarily managed it very well up to that point, and you are not comfortable with passing their probation, then but you equally you can't let them go, then that's another good reason for extending. But generally speaking, only extend if you feel that they can turn things around, and then kind of reflect and change. So when you're thinking back to these kind of scenarios, and if you have to part ways with somebody during a probation period, just reflect back and see, okay, was there anything there? Was there, like, you know, when I go back to the hiring process, was there something there? And it's not that you're looking to apportion blame or anything like that. It's just reflection for lessons learned, that the next time you're filling a role or the next time you're bringing somebody into that area, that this kind of experience, you're learning from it. And it could be absolutely nothing that you did. It could be completely that this role was not the right fit for that person, through no fault of your own. But it is worthwhile just taking that time and reflecting on it, you know. So what do people think? Like, do you think that this is something that might help you when you're managing people? I'm conscious of time now, because I don't want you've been good enough to give up an hour of your time, and I certainly don't want to go over it. But if there's anything else that you'd like to talk about, or if there's any questions on what we had, on what I kind of looked at there for you, is there anything there?